welcome to another episode of Let's Talk. I'm your host, Denise Rollard Barnes, publisher of the Washington Informer, where I am right now in my office, and glad for you all to come and join me as we prepare for this show. We're going to have another continuation of our celebration of Black history and conversations that matter most this week. Boy, this is a week that goes down kind of in our journals and history. It's been an amazing week of losses. We had the whirlwind headlines about one, the loss of Reverend Jesse Jackson, who we all loved and admired. I say we all loved. You may disagree, but I mean, he was at the top of my list of heroes. So it's really been sad news to hear that he finally succumbed to his illness that he's been fighting with for so long. And so while some say it was expected, when death comes, we're still never ready for it. And so there are a lot of memories that we have, and we will show some of those towards the end of the show. And of course, in his words, I am somebody and keep hope alive. Those are the two things I guess, words that we'll remember forever. Just like my dad, as you can see, I don't know what the sign was now, but if it is to be, it's up to me, that I keep in the background. But I always say, keep hope alive. And I thank you, Reverend Jackson, for giving us that mantra to kind of recognize it no matter what, which I think our guests are going to help us to understand as well, why we should keep and do keep hope alive. And then in addition to that, we mourn the passing of Reverend Grayland Hagler, who was the former pastor emeritus of Plymouth Congregational Church here in Washington, D.C. But as you know, he was a fighter for justice and equality, and his contributions in civil rights and his unwavering voice against injustices will forever resonate in our hearts and in our minds throughout our community. I mean, we remember him not only as a leader, but as a beacon of hope for many. And up to his last and final days, Reverend Hagler just continued to fight. He had, because of, I think it's cancer of the larynx, he had lost his voice, but he was still just as powerful. And so many have given kind remarks and remembrances of the work that he did in this community for well over 30 years. So our hearts and prayers go out to his family. We will be reporting on his service. I think services have been arranged for him in the coming weeks. And so we will let you know about those, and we will be there. So in addition, as we remember the both of them, we hope you've picked up this week's copy of the Washington Informer, our latest edition. And as you can see, we both have Reverend Jackson and Reverend Hagler on the cover. Our dedicated reporters have been on the front lines delivering critical coverage that includes, of course, the ongoing conversations around Black history, household debt, and the collapse of the Potomac Interceptor. Wow, the Potomac River. I mean, fortunately, we got some good news about that today, and our reporter Maya has been covering that as well, because that affects all of us, the quality of our rivers and around the city. But we've been covering that, and of course, all the things that plague our communities, but the good news as well. We don't focus on bad news. It's all about the good news. So as always, our team works tirelessly to keep you informed and engaged. So be sure to pick up a copy of the Washington Informer to read all those stories in full. And if not, you can always go online, visit us at our website at washingtoninformer.com. Again, that's washingtoninformer.com. And while you're there, consider becoming a subscriber. We would love to have you as a part of the Informer family. All you have to do is give us your email address. We're not asking for any more. We do, from time to time, ask for donations just to try to keep the doors open and continue to provide the kind of journalism that we think serves our community. But to subscribe, it's free. Just sign up. And we would love to have you as a part of our family, where you will receive our Win Daily, our daily newsletter that comes every day to keep you up to date on the stories that we're covering and other things that we think you might be interested in and we want to share with you to keep you informed. And while tuning into the show today, we want you to spread the word and share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Speaking of staying connected, be sure to follow the Washington Informer. It's We can find us on Facebook, IG, X, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You name a place, we're going to be there. We might even be at your local church or at your local organization's meeting. We're going to be everywhere. So because we are part of this community, and we want to make sure that we keep you, as I keep saying, informed. Today we have a great lineup of guests. Let's get on with the show. We have a great lineup of guests, and I really like the fact that I will have an opportunity to have a brief conversation with our managing editor, Misha Green, who we try to get on from time to time, as well as our other reporters. But I look forward to having a wonderful discussion with renowned author, cultural historian, and the founder of the IKG Cultural Resources. And we're going to talk about what IKG stands for. I'll let him share that with us. But anyway, the Cultural Research Sources and Research and Educational Organization dedicated to promoting the history and culture of African American people. Did I say Tony Browder? I mean, that name is no stranger to anybody in Washington, D.C., but he will be with us today. Anthony Browder, I'm so excited to have a conversation with him about his new book and the trips that he has planned going back to Egypt. You know, he's been there well over probably 60 some times, and he will be going back again, taking folks in his final trips before he passes the baton to his daughter this year. So anyway, later on, our very senior reporter, Sam P.K. Collins, will be sitting down with Dr. Ashley Farmer, a leading scholar whose insights into social justice and history are as enlightening as they are necessary. And again, finally, as I said, Misha and I will have a conversation. We're going to talk about Reverend Jackson and just his contributions, not only nationally, but especially right here in the District of Columbia. So with that, I'd like to just move on with the show. We don't have commercials. Of course, if you ever want to sponsor a segment here on Let's Talk, feel free to do so. Just reach out to us at news, at WashingtonInformer.com. We know a lot of people shy away from commercial television because they don't want to see commercials. But if we can focus on our Black-owned businesses, this is the place where we want you to be. And we want to encourage people, not only if they promote their businesses on the show, we want to make sure that you go there and spend your dollars. All right, that was my commercial. Moving on. I have the distinct honor now of welcoming a remarkable author, historian, and Egyptologist, Anthony Browder. Tony, welcome to Let's Talk.
One of my favorite teachers, John Henry Clark, commented, if you begin your history with slavery, everything since then looks like progress. So I'm about going to the source. Asa Hilliard had always encouraged us to return to the source. And Kemet is the source. Africa is the source of life. Kemet is the source of history, culture, science, philosophy. Everything which makes a civilized people civilized began first here in the Nile Valley. And that's information which everyone has a right and obligation to know, particularly people of African descent. So the story of our greatness precedes the story of our descent into enslavement and debasement by at least 4,500 years. So I choose to focus on the beginning, not the end of our story.
So it's interesting that I had the opportunity to interview you in Egypt during that trip, and you offered your perspective on the work that you do and what Africans should feel about themselves no matter where they are. And now that has turned Tony Browder into a book called The Browder Perspective. Let's talk a little bit about your book. Let's start there, because it sounds like it encapsulates everything that you've done over the last 40 some years.
Right. Well, the subtitle of that book is My 50-Year Journey to Enlightenment. and it documents the experiences that I've had between 1975 and 2025. That was when I was exposed to information about African history and culture and African spirituality, which helped to define who I was as a young African American man who had just graduated from college and was looking to find my proper place in the world. And so it was my introduction to African spirituality that really confirmed in my consciousness who I was and what my spirit was supposed to do in this lifetime. And that led me to meeting Ivan Van Sertima 2 years later in 1977 when I heard him discuss his book, They Came Before Columbus, The African Presence in America. And it was during that talk that Ivan said that the ancient Egyptians were Black. That was the first time in my life anyone had ever informed me that the founders of the Nile Valley civilization were, in fact, people who looked like me. That's when I began my deeper dive into what I now refer to as knowledge and discovered scholars, discovered information and knowledge which had intentionally been withheld from me. And as I began searching out these various sources of new information, that led to my first trip to Africa, to Egypt, specifically with Dr. Ben in 1980. And if all goes as planned, I will complete my 71st trip to Egypt in December of this year. And so my latest book, A Browder Perspective, talks about my journey and provides a black print, if you will, for how others who are also looking to find their real cultural heritage and identity can do so by tapping into some of the resources that I introduced them to.
Tony, as I read through this, and I think there's one thing that you mentioned in the book that sort of directed your life was the fact that you said you never wanted to work for anybody. Uh,
Exactly.
your was it your father, I think, or your
My
grandfather,
grandfather, my
right?
grandfather. Yes.
Who
Hmm.
sort of you? It's an observation that you had that grounded you into this space that you always wanted to be self-employed. So,
Exactly.
so, and then I go back personally, and I think about a kid in junior high school when Dr. King was assassinated. That was the thing that sparked sort of my interest in Black history because we had a Black history teacher that came after that. So, even with what you've done today, what was it about your early years, even before going to college, that made you receptive? Information is given to us, but a lot of times we don't receive it, and
Sure.
so you received this and it directed you in this path, towards, you know, Egypt, African spirituality, all of that. What was it about your younger years that made you receptive to this?
Well, I just happened to be doing this interview from Chicago. I came here yesterday to receive a award and acknowledgement for from the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, at his annual Black History program. And so he acknowledged my work. And so coming home is always a reminder of what my journey has been. I take pride in sharing with people that my mother was 16 years old when I was born. So I grew up in my grandparents' household on the west side of Chicago. And so I was now the ninth mouth that my grandfather was responsible for feeding. And I watched my grandfather, who migrated to Chicago from Vernon, Alabama in the 1940s. I watched him struggle. And I watched him as a undereducated Black man who could not find meaningful employment in Chicago, who was often debased by his employers. And he brought his anger and his frustration home. And I saw the impact that it had on my grandmother and my mother and her siblings. And it was only after my grandfather died that I began to realize the struggles that shaped his life and how that then impacted the lives of everyone in his household. And so I made a commitment to myself that I was not going to give anybody that much power over my life. So that is what has driven my determination to be self-employed. And I'm blessed to say that I've been self-employed for 47 years. And having the ability to control my own finances, my own life, is the greatest expression of freedom. It's allowed me to cultivate my interest in African and African American history. So I spend my money and I buy books. And then I travel to conferences to meet the authors of the books that I've read. And when an opportunity presents itself, I travel to the countries that I've read about in my book. So that's what started my international travels. And because of the fact that I'm creative, and for those of us who are self-employed, we have to be very flexible. I have used my talents as a designer, as someone with a background in advertising, to write information about African history, to make that information, that knowledge, palatable to a people who've been socialized to dislike reading. So I'm using my marketing skills to market what I love, African history and culture. And it's been a blessing for me. I also own my own publishing company. So I've been responsible for publishing almost a dozen books, my daughter's books. And it allows me to live the quality of life that I've always wanted to live and help to liberate the minds of sisters and brothers who matter so much to me in the process.
And that liberation of the mind is what, I think a lot of people get out of listening to you and reading your books and reading the books that you refer to people, because in this book, you give, after you give your perspective, you give a book list, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, but it's the spiritual part that really kind of resonates, because it's not, we look at things sometimes as, I guess, social scientists or whatever, and we, do research or whatever, but there's something deeper here,
Sure.
and something I think you want people to get out of what you have learned and discovered about, our African heritage, about from whence we came, how far back we go. I remember asking you in that interview, I said, do you now, after all these trips to Egypt, um, uh, understand why people say, we came from the kings and queens of Africa? And you're like, I hate that. I hate that. So, I mean, talk about the spiritual connection that you've made and that you hope other people are making as they listen and read what you, purvey.
Sure. Well, let me just add some context to what you just said. I
Okay.
dislike people saying that we were kings and queens because less than 1/10 of 1% of Africans on the continent were kings and queens. The vast majority of people were teachers, were writers, were physicians, were healers, were carpenters, were masons. And that still holds true today in any society on the planet. So we have a tendency to focus our attention on the highest ranking among the pyramids in our societies and forget the people who make the kings, who make the queens. So that's where our power really lies. And the king or the queen only represents the masses of the people. So I'm about acknowledging the masses who make everything possible. Everything that exists, everything that we know about the past, ancient Egypt, for example, we know because of the artists, the engineers, the architects, the designers, the people, the civil servants who maintained that institution. And so those are the people, those are the lives that matter. And so with regards to your question concerning spirit, what I also have come to understand based on my 68 trips to Egypt thus far, based on my 15 years of excavating and restoring Kushite tombs on the West Bank of Luxor, Egypt, based on my travels to West Africa, what I know, not what I think, not what I believe, but what I know is that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, that our bodies are temporaries, but our spirit, our souls are eternal. And what we find from studying Nile Valley civilization specifically is that they had a social system in place where they acknowledged the temporary nature of the body, but the immortality of the soul, or the Ba, as it was called in ancient Egypt. So there were processes for the evaluation and the elevation of the soul of a deceased person. There were processes in place for honoring the spirit, the memory of those ancestors who are no longer here. So it's about ancestral acknowledgement. It's about ancestral reverence that society had focused all of its attention on. So we have inherited some of those same traditions without really understanding its source or understand how to connect into that spirit. For example, the idea of taking flowers to a grave. That began in the Nile Valley. There were rituals every week. There was a ritual that was performed by sisters of the 25th dynasty where they did that. This idea of pouring libation is a process that began in the Nile Valley. So that's a part of our essence. And so it's simply a matter of us remembering who we were before our historical and cultural memory was disrupted by the Ma'afa and enslavement and discrimination, and tapping into the best of that spiritual power that has always resided in us, and affirming that so that we can tap into that source, which has always been our guide. The reason why Africans in America are some of the most envious people on the planet is because of that African spirit that has never been suppressed. And so now, what this current regime in power are forcing us to do is to remember who we were and turn back to those institutions that we created before integration, that educated us to be proud sons and daughters of Africans, and to find ways to enlighten and empower our children so that they won't be confused about who they are and the greatness that resides within them.
One of the things, and I'm not going to, I want folks to go out and get your book, which well, let's talk about that though, that we can get the book. Tell us where the book is available.
You can get the book at Sankofa. You can get the book at Mahogany's. You can get the book in Baltimore at Everyone's Place. You can purchase the book from my website, ikg-info.com. Like you, I am a firm believer in supporting Black businesses. So we want to support those people that have a vested interest in the maintenance of our community. Yes, you can get the book from other places, but Jeff Bezos don't need our money. Let's spend our dollars with people who affirm our identity and will feed back and support institutions that also do the same.
Going back to the point that you were making about spirituality, it said, you wrote, for centuries we were taught to look upward for deliverance when the real source of power has always been inward.
Yes.
And you just spoke about that, but that we go to church and we're looking for we believe it's not a God thing, but let me not explain it. I want you to explain it.
All right. Well, something that I've learned from my association with psychiatrists and psychologists. The brain is an associative organ. The brain responds to specific and direct thoughts and speech. So the brain cannot process the word belief. The brain cannot process the word hope. That sends it into this loop where it doesn't know where to go. You have to give your brain specific instructions as to what you want to create, what you want to come into existence. So part of Nile Valley Studies, part of knowing yourself is to know that the Creator resides within us, and that we as human beings have the capacity to co-create. We can bring into existence those things that we desire. So it's critically important to educate the mind to understand that what you think, what you speak, you bring into existence. So those are powerful tools that can be used to either create heaven on earth or hell on earth. And as Dr. Carter G. Woodson said, when you control a person's thinking, you don't have to worry about their actions. So everything that we do should be about the controlled use of our thought, the controlled use of our speech, in order to manifest on the physical plane of existence that which we want our children's children to inherit. So if we aren't thinking at least 3 to 7 generations into the future, if we are thinking about creating the world that we want our precious children to live in, then we have failed them. We have failed them. And another quick point I want to make, I see you're watching the clock, Denise, and we all are monitoring time. I've got a plane to catch in a couple of hours.
Oh
So
wow. Okay.
I lost a dear friend
Yeah.
Dr. Charles Finch on the day that we had our book launch on January the 17th. Charles Finch was the person, one of the organizers of the Nile Valley Conference, which was held at Morehouse in September of 1984. And it was that conference that cemented in my consciousness what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. When I saw these scholars, historians, psychologists, physicians, educators talk about the value of Nile Valley culture and civilization. And so what we are doing in DC next Thursday, the 26th of January, is having a 40-day ascension ceremony to acknowledge the spirit of Dr. Charles Finch. And so
30,
that
26th of February.
the 26th of February, which is the
Okay.
day after what would have been Dr. Finch's 78th birthday. So
Okay.
within traditional African spiritual societies, it is um, the reality is embraced that when a person dies, their soul reviews their life over the course of 40 days. And then in ancient Comedic civilization, they have the scene of the weighing of the soul, where the soul is weighed opposite the feather ma'at, and one has to declare their innocence by reciting the 42 admonitions of ma'at, from which the 10 commandments were derived. And after that declaration of innocence, and if the heart is found to be as light as a feather, if the person has lived a righteous life, then they go on to reap the reward in the afterlife, and then that soul becomes an ancestor. So it takes 40 days after a person's death before they become an ancestor. So we're going to be working with the Adasi sisters and several other Washington, D.C. stalwarts that you and I know very well and respect very highly. We're going to formally welcome the spirit of Dr. Charles Finch into the ancestral realm, where we can now, for the rest of our lives, call on him as an ancestor to inspire us, to direct us, and guide us as we continue to do our work here on the earthly plane.
Before and that's going to be where?
That's going to be at the Thurgood Marshall Center, 1816 12th Street Northwest, between 6 and 8 p.m. And I'll share with you the link. That event will also be live streamed. So I'll share that with you, Denise, so you can share it with your listeners
Wonderful.
and viewers.
As I said before, we could be here all day and night with all the questions that I have and all the responses that I'm sure you could give. But I'll just ask, I know that you had a book signing, a book release and book signing at Thurgood Marshall about a month or so ago. Are you going to do that again? Are you planning
Right.
to? Mhm.
I am. I'm waiting for Sharikiana at Sankofa to confirm a date. They want to have my signing somewhere on the campus of Howard University. I've been in contact with the owners of Mahogany Books, and they will be doing something soon. So more than likely, those events will take place in March or April. I'm getting ready to go out on a book tour at the end of March, and I'll be traveling to the South, and then April I'll be in California, and May I'll be in Texas, and we'll be selling some books and
So
raising some minds.
will
Yes,
folks be able to go to the website to find out where you will be and over the next couple of months?
absolutely. All of the details can be found at the IKG website. Yeah, thank
Okay.
you for that shout out.
And I know you're going, you have two trips. I don't want to say final. I know they won't be final, but two, I mean, trips where you're taking people to Egypt over the next, well, this year. And then you're
Yes.
passing the baton to your daughter. Talk about that a little bit before we go.
Sure. I took my daughter to Egypt with me when she was 7 years old in 1989. And then we published her first book a year later. And at the time we published my book, my daughter was 7 years old. She was the youngest published author in America. That book was entitled My First Trip to Africa, and it was about her trip to Egypt. So by the time she went to Hampton University, she had published two books about her travels around the world with me to discover the African presence. And she found her world history professor was using my book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, to teach African history. So I have immersed my daughter in her history. I've assumed responsibility for teaching her who she is as a person of African descent. So she's been to Egypt 20 times. And she is well prepared to take over my study tours to Egypt so that I can visit some other countries in Africa. I want to go to Cameroon. I want to go to Burkina Faso. I want to go to some other places and share what I find in those places with my audience. So I can pass the baton to my daughter. I now have a grandson, and he's going to travel with us to Africa. And Atlantis, at the appropriate time, will pass the baton to him. So I am now making my last 3 trips to Egypt this year. We've had such a demand in the July and the December study tours that we added a third date. And that third date is June the 16th through the 30th. People
Okay.
can go to our website and get details and sign up for that tour. And if all goes as planned, I'll probably be taking over 300 people to Egypt this year on my final study tour before I pass the baton to my daughter.
Well, full disclosure, I'm preparing to go with you in December. I want to experience that winter solstice that you talked about. I'm not sure what's
Yeah.
planned, but I'm open, and we will come back and report on that trip to those who did not were not able to attend. But Tony, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. I really tell people you need to pick this book up. You need to read it. You need to read it. Might have to read it a couple times, and and then come and hear him speak if you haven't already, and just experience the spirituality that exists within. I want to thank you for being with us today.
And Denise, thank you so much, and all the best to everything that you and your organization are doing. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Alrighty, likewise. Safe travels.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye. So I want to, I get personal sometimes with my interviews. Y'all know I do that, but that's just that's the person in me, as well as the journalist in me. I love to ask questions and learn more. And there's someone else who likes to do the same thing, and that's why he is a member of our team, and that is Sam P.K. Collins, who is a journalist who lives and breathes. Black history and community and truth telling and storytelling. So Sam, are you here? Because I certainly want to pitch this to you right now, so that you can bring on our next guest. Sam P.K. Collins, are you there? Okay, maybe Sam's not here. So I guess maybe I can bring on Dr. Ashley now until Sam comes, who is our next guest. Dr. Ashley, how are you?
Good. How are you today?
I'm just pumped. And now I've got you here. I'm so excited to be able to talk to folks who know something about something. You know what I'm saying? So tell us a little bit about yourself. And I know we talked a little before we went on air, and that you're down there in Austin, Texas, but you've been writing books as well and focusing on Black history and women, the role of women. And I think Sam is coming on. So if he is here, I'm going to bring him in while we start the conversation. But go ahead and give us a little bit of your background.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. As I was telling you, I'm a history professor at the University of Texas in Austin, in Black Studies and History, where when I'm not writing books, I'm teaching, big, huge classes about the Black experiences. And it's one of my real joys. But I'm also a historian of Black women and Black women's intellectual history. So I wrote a book before the one we are going to talk about today called Remaking Black Power, How Black Women Transform an Era, which was really a history of how Black women engaged and thought about Black power and its ability to transform their lives. But as a historian, I'm really interested not just in documenting the fact that Black women were there, but also thinking about the ways in which they were really the architects, both organizationally, but also ideologically of our movements.
Before Sam comes on again, I want to ask, I'm definitely going to pick up the books. I haven't read them yet, full disclosure. But I'm wondering, because we've been hearing so much about what's happening on university campuses with those who are with Black History programs, Black History curricula, folks who are focusing on Black history? How have you been able to duck that there?
We haven't. Actually, last week, UT Austin announced that they were consolidating all of our ethnic studies programs. So I don't know if people know this, but the University of Texas at Austin had the biggest Black studies program in the country. Undergrad degrees, PhD granting degrees, a policy wing, an art wing, and 2 art galleries. Separately, we also had a thriving Mexican American and Latino studies department, an Asian American studies department, an indigenous studies department, and a women's studies department. The school is trying to consolidate all of those. So we need folks in the public to make their voice heard about the fact that they don't want this. We need those who might be associated with these universities, wherever you are, to get involved, and also use your donor dollars to count, because it is a real travesty to see how much we have built this curriculum up for folks in Texas and beyond, and how they are trying to destroy it.
Wow, I was just, when you talked about that, I was thinking how fortunate the students are there to have a professor like you teaching the courses that you're teaching, and then I'm thinking, oh my, what's about to happen? Not knowing that you're really facing that already.
Yes, absolutely. So, people sometimes think that what happens on the universities don't affect them around the world, but without a university, it creates an ecosystem where it teaches our young people that it's okay not to know this history,
Mhm.
and not to be citizens of the world in every sense, shape, and form. And it's not only imperative that we do this because it's important and it's ethically and morally right, but also because we want to prepare young people to be global citizens in the truest sense. And that means understanding people and having empathy from and for all people of all cultures and races.
Well, shout out to you, Dr. Farmer, for, fighting the fight and continuing and telling folks what we need to do. I mean, to reach out to the university, especially alumni,
Yes,
donors.
absolutely. Yes. Email those provosts, those presidents, and let them know that this is not the way that we expect higher education and academic freedom to go.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to pass you on to Sam P.K. Collins, who is here now. And thank you very much for that chat with me.
Of
Sam.
course. Thank you so much for having me.
I like the way it starts. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Good to see you.
Likewise, very, very good to see you. I don't know if the producers told you, but I was very excited for this interview.
I heard. Yes. Yeah.
So I'm not entirely sure how much you have talked about the book, but I would definitely like to, if you can just talk more about what inspired you to speak about Queen Mother Moore. Queen Mother Moore being a nationalist and a woman at that. And I'm asking this question because, as I'm sure you are aware, when people speak about Black nationalism, at least in circles I've been in, there's oftentimes concern about um, how women are treated within those circles and whether they have a voice. So I'm just curious as to your upbringing. If you can just speak to your exposure to this great ancestor and what inspired you to write about her.
Absolutely. So I would say there's 2 things. I first encountered Queen Mother Moore when I was a young kid through the book called I Dream a World, and it had portraits of Black women. And the portrait that you see here that's on the cover of the book was my first exposure to Moore. My mother, who is a woman who graduated from Fisk. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. Somebody who loved history, but in her day and age, never thought that she could be a historian for a living, used to instill upon me the importance of Black women in all of these movements. And once I started researching and writing about Black women as my career, my first book called Remaking Black Power, I interviewed probably 30 to 40 activists, and almost everybody had a story about Queen Mother Moore. It was the first time that they had heard anybody talk about reparations from her. It was the first time they'd ever heard about Garvey, right? They talked about the way that she could walk across the stage and inspire and move people to action in support of African liberation and what was happening with police brutality down the street. And so I had to know more about her. And when I did, I found out that there really wasn't much about her. I couldn't find anything beyond kind of a couple of interviews and blog posts from folks that had known her and met her. And I was absolutely astonished that someone who lived from 1898 to 1997 who had been a part of the Garvey movement, the Communist Party movement, the Republic of New Africa, the Million Man March, had not been documented in her full kind of glory and entirety.
For those who aren't aware, would you mind just speaking about the PGRNA, the Republic of New Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about this because it gives me a chance to tell a really great story about Queen Mother Moore. So I want to emphasize that here from the 1920s to the 1960s, Moore always advocated for Black people to have a separate Black nation. And she moved that idea not just from immigrating back to Africa, but actually having a separate Black nation on US soil. And so when people started to kind of think seriously about this idea in the late 1960s in Detroit, she was one of the people that was at the kind of forefront of creating this organization. And I love telling this story because folks say that when they kind of went to this unfurled this document that was a declaration for a separate Black nation on US soil, people got a little skittish about actually signing it. But Moore walked to the front and was one of the first signatories of the declaration because it embodied the ideals that she had been fighting for at that point for the better part of 50 years, right? The fact that Black people were a free and separate people, the fact that integration into the United States was futile, that America, as it were, is a failed project in terms of, kind of racial harmony. The fact that Black people are owed reparations and that money should be used as the seed money to start a separate Black nation, and that this could connect us back to our heritage of Africa more broadly. So Moore functioned for the first couple of years in the PGRNA as it started to develop across the nation in northern cities, and as they started to develop their own plebiscite down in Jackson, Mississippi in the early 1970s. So when people talk about Black nationalism as some kind of like pie in the sky ideal that can never come true, that just is not historically accurate. We have and continue to create formulations that, bring these ideals to real people on the ground.
And just to build off your point, the plebiscite ideal itself just comes out of this notion that out of the Civil War and Reconstruction, we weren't, as African people, given a choice to declare our citizenship. They sort of imposed that on us. And another point you brought up was in reference, I like how you connected reparations or even nationhood to Africa, and that vein between the Garvey movement and the PGRNA. My next question is in regards to reparations. I'm not sure how familiar you are with this whole FBA and ADOS movement that's popping up in recent years. I just wanted to get your take on that. How does Queen Mother Moore sort of dispel this notion that reparations is something that only can be fought within the framework of being an African American? How does she dispel this notion of us needing to use ethnocentrism in order to advance reparations? If that makes sense.
I think that's a really great question. So Moore started really advocating for reparations in the late 1950s, early 1960s. So during a time when, this really seemed like a very fringe thing, not something that is in kind of our everyday vernacular every day. But I would say that at its core, Moore was not just arguing about reparations for slavery, though she did think that Black people deserved that. But writing in the 1960s, she was also talking about that we deserved reparations for the afterlives of slavery, all of the years of cultural, economic, mental, psychological, physical, right, degradation, dehumanization that we had been through. And that means that even if you could not trace yourself directly as a descendant of a enslaved person in the United States, you still have been wronged, right? And you were still owed something from the aftermath of what slavery and racism and Jim Crow had produced, right? So her argument moved just beyond kind of payment for actual labor to payment for the range of atrocities that Black folk had endured. And so it doesn't really matter whether or not you can trace your lineage directly to a slave that was working in the American South, because as a Black person, you've been wronged and the government owes you something. Also, as a Black person, I say, I think Queen Mother Moore was certainly about making that wrong right. But she also, I think, saw reparations as a way to kind of heal some of the ruptures of the Middle Passage, right? She didn't think that we should take the money and integrate into American society, but she thought that we should take the money and start to kind of create a revolution of our minds, where we let go of this idea of Americanness in general and recaptured our understanding and relationship to Africa. So for her, it was certainly about a wrong for the past, but it was also about building a different African-centered future. And that just doesn't work if you stick to kind of ethno-nationalist notions of reparations.
You know why I like your answer, if I may, for just a second? I like how you use that word lineage. I'm not sure if you did that intentionally, but that
Yeah.
you definitely. All right. So just in that same vein, right? Please paint a picture for us. So, within 1960s, 70s, we're still in this time period before the Gary Convention, where nationalist sentiments and integrationist sentiments are still, neck and neck. Integrationism hasn't quite taken over the Black community just yet. Can you just, in that frame of time, speak about Queen Mother of Moore's impact as it relates to, assisting John Conyers in Congress and just others? How did she add to the conversation at that time around reparations, if I am getting the history correct in that sense?
Yeah. I love this question because it gives me opportunity to talk about kind of where the origins of the modern reparation movement comes from. And it actually comes from Moore's group called the Universal Association of Ethiopian Women, which you can see her, kind of reaching back to her Garvey roots in that, right? And really, this is a band of middle-aged Black women in New Orleans that by day are getting Black men off of death row for allegedly raping white women and making sure Black women got enough to eat. And by night, basically creating the architectural framework of modern Black nationalism. How are they doing that? One, they're thinking about the fact that, in Moore's words, somebody needs to pay for all of this, right? For the atrocities that Black people are experiencing in the Jim Crow South all the way back to slavery. And two, the idea that, integration is really futile among unequal people. So what can we use this money to build with instead of trying to, kind of seal up cracks in a crumbling building? And so because of that, she is really actually like literally writing pamphlets and distributing pamphlets talking about the case for reparations in terms of past precedent, about enumerating the atrocities that Black people have experienced, and then offering a framework for how repayment could work while things like the March on Washington are going on, right? And she's spreading this. She's literally sometimes going from place to place, from a church to a community group to a nationalist group, and letting anybody who will listen talk about it. And so I see her as kind of really planting the seeds of that, all while maybe everybody's looking towards the March on Washington. And as we get the Civil Rights Act, as we get the Voting Rights Act, and Black life doesn't really improve that much, then you see folks kind of coming back to Moore's idea that really you cannot integrate until you are an equal. And the only way to integrate and become equals is, to right the wrongs that have made in the past. So it really is this moment where everybody is focused on sit-ins and the March on Washington, and she is literally going in the opposite direction and galvanizing people for a wholly different understanding of their relationship to the American nation state.
All right, so we got a lot of directions we can go in. We're going to get kind of tangential here. Can you please just talk about Ethiopianism? Because to your point, this band of women, and back then during that time, a lot of people of our people were using Ethiopian in their vernacular. So what is the importance of that, of that mind state, Ethiopianism? What is it, and what is its significance?
So Moore is kind of first introduced to the concept of Ethiopia as both like a real place that has never been colonized, right, by white folks in Africa, and as an idea of kind of the cradle of Black civilization. And that's something that Garvey really instilled in her back in the 1920s when she was in her 20s, and really having this awakening and nationalist becoming and Pan-Africanist becoming, right? And then she kind of felt it in a really tangible way when in 1935, Italy tried to invade Ethiopia. And she was part of a group in Harlem that was sending supplies and fighting back against this, right? And then, so now she's invested in it, not just as an idea of like the cradle of Black civilization, but also as in a real place where Black people are practicing nationhood and self-determination, right? So by the time we get to the 1950s and 60s, she and other former Garveyites really hold on to the idea as a way to kind of signal their nationalist politics, as a way to assert their desire for African decolonization, and also to inspire those around them with the idea that Black people have a whole lineage and a whole history and a whole actual physical space that quite frankly has nothing to do with white folks. And that's what they should be galvanizing around. So it certainly was an idea, but for her, it was a very real understanding of what it was like to put Black nationalist principles into action.
Yeah, that brings to mind for me Psalm chapter 68, verse 31. Uh, So clarifying question, Queen Mother Moore and the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey, were they contemporaries or was there a mentor-mentee relationship? I'm not quite clear on that.
Yeah, they were definitely contemporaries. So actually Moore was born fairly well off. She was actually living a pretty great life as one can live as a Black girl in Jim Crow, Louisiana in New Orleans. But she was orphaned and slid down the class ladder. And I think this opened her eyes to kind of the degradation around the world. But she married a Jamaican sailor. Jamaica is where Marcus Garvey originated and where the UNIA originated. And he introduced her to Garveyism. And if you'll give me a little bit of lead time, I'd love to tell the story that she tells about it, because I think it really captures her spirit. So I want you to imagine that it's the early 1920s, 1922. Moore went from being this kind of woman who had maids and nannies to being a maid and nanny in white women's household. And she is walking to the Longshoremen's Hall in New Orleans, Louisiana. This is like a 2-story, very traditional structure. It's got those shutters that we all know to remind us of the Gulf South. And she says she's walking slow because she's got a 45 in her bra, another in her pocketbook, and that her husband has a suitcase full of bullets, right? And as she's walking into the Longshoremen's Hall, they're asking, everybody is trying to figure out if Marcus Garvey is going to speak tonight. And that's because he came to New Orleans, which was a stronghold for the UNIA. And he was arrested because he could rouse Black people to nationalist action like that, right? And so they're ready to defend him with guns. So as she tells it, Marcus Garvey comes bounding down the middle of the benches and the police threaten to arrest him. And everybody raises their guns in kind. And they say, "Speak, Garvey, speak. Speak, Garvey, speak," right? And she says they put their guns away, and she hears Marcus Garvey talk about, ancient Africa, talk about the fact that she should be proud of her skin and her hair, talk about the fact that the same things happen to Black people in Cairo are the same things happen in South Carolina, which are the same things happening in Cuba, which are the same things happening in Canada. And she starts to kind of put it all together. And she becomes a Garveyite then and there, right? And so, Garvey leaves after that, about 5 years after that, when he's deported by the federal government. But she is, in many ways, one of the foremost Garveyites that carries his ideals from the 1920s all the way to the 1990s.
Let's talk about Ghana for a second. So I'm not quite knowledgeable about this, but did Queen Mother Moore by any chance have a relationship with Kwame Nkrumah or with his family or with like any of his progenitors? If you can just delve into that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly enough, Queen Mother Moore was a lover of Africa, but she was very wary of going to Africa as a tourist and kind of recapitulating the power hierarchies that she knew was in place. So she actually did not step foot onto the African continent until she went to Kwame Nkrumah's funeral in 1972. But there, it was very much kind of a political awakening of another moment. And I want to remind folks that she was born in 1898. So by the time it's 1972, she is, in the later stages of her life before she really touches down. So she admires Nkrumah, but never actually gets to meet him. But while she is there, she goes to Guinea and sees Sekou Touré. And then this prompts her being invited back to Tanzania several times for different conferences, like the All African Women's Conference, the 6th Pan-African Congress. She ends up going to Nigeria. She ends up going to Uganda as the personal guest of Idi Amin, which if you pick up the book, you'll read about their, sordid relationship. So I wouldn't say that she necessarily had a one-to-one relationship with Nkrumah, but through Nkrumah, right, Africa opened up to her. And she was treated as kind of the queen of Black America and feted as such. And she went on about 8 different trips between like 1972 and 1980 to different African countries.
All right, Miss Farmer, we about to go in because
Yeah.
all right. So the Sixth Pan-African Congress, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you know, this was the first Pan-African Congress after decolonization. A lot
Mm-hmm.
to discuss. To your
Yes.
knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
as a member of the diaspora, Queen of the
Mm-hmm.
Moor, what did she add to the conversation? What were
Mm-hmm.
her observations as to the diaspora's place in
Mm-hmm.
Pan-Africanism at the time?
Yeah, I mean, Queen Mother Moore is an interesting person because basically she's been around for all the Pan African Congresses, more or less, right?
That's
And this is the
true. That's
first,
true.
yeah, and that's the first. This is the first one that she actually got to attend, and she's thrilled that it's the first one on African soil, right? Um, so she served not as a delegate, but as an observer at that conference. And so a lot of what you see her doing there is kind of moving in and out, talking to people, having audiences with everybody from Nyerere to Amiri Baraka. And if you're a student of that time, you know that there was a huge kind of rift there between the Marxist and the nationalist that took place. And Moore was ardently still on the nationalist side. She felt that people had gone too far into their class politics. She also really advocated for reparations while she was there. When you talk to people that saw her there, that's one thing they remember about it. But she also felt disappointed by it in the end. She didn't feel like there was enough concrete plans coming out of that because people were too working towards too much infighting for there really to make a plan for Black Americans to support, decolonization and nationalism, and for the diaspora to kind of build something separate from Western culture.
To that point, my understanding was that, by that time period, I think it was 75. Yeah, it was
76.
75,
Mhm,
74,
mhm,
70.
mhm.
Okay, yeah.
Mhm,
So I guess because the newly independent African countries had gotten their
mhm,
independence, I feel like everybody was a big man or woman in their country. So
mhm,
it was, and then in addition to that, the diaspora having known intimately what racism is and was, that
mhm,
was sort of like that struggle, just sort of explaining to the leftists, like, hey, listen,
mhm.
race is still a factor,
Yep.
so
Mhm,
before we wrap up,
mhm,
and I wish we can go on longer, but um, again, going back to my original point, the the African woman's place in nationalism,
mhm.
not
Yeah.
place, but the African woman as it relates to nationalism. Like,
Mhm,
what can we take away from this? Why is it important that we highlight more of these women, the Queen of the Moors, the Amy Jocks Garveys,
yeah, the Dara
women like that?
Bubakaris, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so most of the time we think of nationalism as a young Black man's game, right? It's the Malcolms, it's the Garvey when he was young, and women seem as kind of helpmates or nothing at all. And I think
Right.
somebody like Moore shows us, one, that that is not true. Not only was she part of every moment in nationalist history in the 20th century, she also midwifed some of them, whether that be through her groups on the ground, like the Universal Association of Ethiopian Women I talked about, whether that was mentoring Malcolm X and other folks who went on to become major nationalist leaders, whether that was creating the infrastructure for things like the Republic of New Africa, and then holding positions of power in those places, right? So I don't want to pretend that they didn't face sexism and that the relationship wasn't complicated, but it wasn't a wholesale women weren't involved or women weren't crucial to it. And I think that's what Moore teaches us.
Ashley D. Farmer, y'all. Please talk to us a bit about your book, how we can get it, if you don't mind.
Yes, so the book is called Queen Mother, Black Nationalism, Reparations, and the Untold Story of Audley Moore. It is a cradle to grave biography of this remarkable woman who lived for 100 years. You can get it at Mahogany Books and any other independent bookseller. And I hope that you'll check it out. And you can find me on socials if you want to tell me what you think about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for engaging with it.
Yes, ma'am. You on mute. Or
Thank you. I'm just having a conversation with myself. That was amazing. And, sometimes because we do so much writing ourselves and other work, we don't get a chance to really sit down and read. And as Tony Browder said, in our books are sort of the pathway to freedom and, just clearing our minds and letting us kind of get an opportunity to see what's out there. And so when we read the story about Queen Mother Moore, who I met many years ago as a younger person, you just never know the history and the background of the people that are in your presence. So I truly, truly, truly enjoyed that interview, and look forward to getting her book and the one that's coming next. She talked about, I don't know if you heard that one, but there's another book that's coming after that she's writing about. So we just hope that these institutions will continue to understand the value of Black history and other ethnic groups, the history of many other groups, because they're really doing the country a disservice when they silence our writers, or they attempt to silence our writers. So, as you are over there at Howard University, with your students, teaching them.
oh, no question, no
All
question.
right.
Black press history at that.
Yes,
Let
yes.
them know.
Well, I want to thank you for that. I know we are supposed to bring on Misha Green, managing editor of The Informer, to talk a little bit more about Reverend Jackson. And so we want to close out with this conversation. Misha, great. I learned a lot in this show.
I'm telling you, I mean, lesson after lesson after lesson, I'm over here thinking, okay, I should have been recording this so I could transcribe it. But that's the beauty of technology. I can get all these quotes later. I learned so much. So thank you to Dr. Farmer, to Dr. Browder, and the entire crew. You all's interviews were incredibly engaging. And so thank you for allowing us to learn along the way.
Well, I'm glad that he's seated. We of course had a couple of folks listening and watching. Hazel Mosby, my mom Vera Abbott, and Barrington Salmon. Haven't seen Barrington in a long time, so glad. I know that he said he loved this, Sam. So I know he did. I know he did. Loved that interview. And of course, our very own Stacey Brown, who we could have had on actually for this segment.
Yeah.
We go on to talk about our hero that we just lost was Reverend Jesse L. Jackson. And so I know that, Sam did a wonderful piece this week on Reverend Jackson, and Misha, you did your magic, as editing that piece. But talk a little bit about, Sam, about what you captured and the voices that you were able to get locally.
No question. The local voices I got. First, shout out to Marcus Bachelor. He's actually running for the Shadow Senate seat. And it was very cool in just conceptualizing that story, reaching out to him, seeing as Marcus was born during the late Reverend Jesse Jackson's period as one of the first two shadow senators for DC. So just hearing Marcus's reflections and him reflecting on the continuation of that legacy and what's left to be done as it relates to garnering statehood. And even at such a time right now where home rule itself is in danger of being repealed or being chipped at by the Trump administration and by the Republican Congress. Another voice, First Lady for Life, Cora Masters Berry, she really gave me a whole lot. That was the interview of interviews, just in terms of her husband's relationship, Mayor Marion Barry's relationship with the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. Hearing about how he was one of two mayors to support Reverend Jesse Jackson's presidential run, and how the announcement at the convention center back in '84 or '88 was packed, and how that announcement went on and on and on because staff members just supported that endeavor. And just learning more about how in his last years, around the time of the renaming of what's now Marion Barry Avenue, Jesse Jackson, even with his health, was very adamant about recording a video in tribute to his late friend. So that friendship and the history of that friendship from Reverend Jesse Jackson eulogizing Marion Barry, to even him marrying the Barrys back in '94. It was just very impactful hearing that history. And one more point I want to bring up: Cora Masters Berry was very adamant about her reflection on how these two friends growing up in the Jim Crow South, organizing in the Jim Crow South, and how by virtue of them being immersed in that turbulent environment where a black man can be killed for sport, right? That they came up and they changed the world in their own way. And given where we are right now and the comforts, the relative comforts that we have, we're talking about the last of the Mohicans. So it's like, um, who is it that we have? Of course, it's us. We're doing the work right now, but Jesse Jackson represents an era that is bygone, and we do have a few other people who are still here with us. But the more and more these ancestors transition, the more we realize that there's still work to be done. And we got to do the work right now in terms of just documenting this. And I'll leave it there.
No, I appreciate that, Sam. I do. I mean, and just I just have to say, because I have to say it. Reverend Jackson also eulogized my dad when he passed.
Mm,
And the service was held at Shiloh Baptist Church, and I've just appreciated the fact that he would come in and do that, for the family. But there was a generation of leaders at that time, and they may not always have agreed, but they did not openly disagree. Fortunately, we didn't have social media then where they could badmouth each other on, on Twitter or whatever. They really got together and talked things through, because they had to have a public, united front. And so, I mean, I think that's the difference of what we probably see now with what we saw then. And when Reverend Jackson was the shadow senator, he lived near Howard University in, I can't remember what's the neighborhood.
LaJoy Park.
LaJoy Park, right? They bought a house there, and he served there. And I'll just say really quickly, there's so many, memories that folks would have of him being in the district. But I know I also remember when some public housing was being torn down over here in Southeast off of Wheeler Road. And because of the conditions that people were living in at the time, Reverend Jackson came over and nights, spent the night over in this community. I think we have some photographs of him and some of the men who were living there. It made a difference. It makes a difference. And we try to do things from a different, we don't connect anymore because we're doing this, you know. So, Misha, I know you have some memories as you posted some photographs of yourself on Facebook with you and Reverend Jackson. I know you all met.
I did. I just want to first shout out everybody, the entire team jumping into high gear, if you will, when we learned of the sad news of not only Reverend Jackson's passing, but hours later we learned of Reverend Hagler's. And I think at about 7 in the morning, Stacey Brown sent me a piece that we were able to get online. Emil Harris immediately started conducting interviews with people here. And then Sam was able to do that wonderful piece looking at Reverend Jackson's contributions to the district, which is on the front this week. So I want to, yay. Yes, thank you.
Pick up a copy.
Pick up a copy, pick up a copy, pick up a copy. But then right under there, we had the article about Reverend Hagler, which again, thank you to you, DRB, Sam, and Hamil for your work on that piece. But one of the things that I found with both of them, just before I share my own reflections, is that faith in action really is what they were about. We looked at Reverend Jackson, who obviously was a faith leader, but so much of what, and I love this picture with two great faith leaders, but that they were able to use the lessons that they learned in their Christian values in order to go and take it to the streets and to be freedom fighters and Reverend Wanda Thompson said the same thing about Reverend Hagler in November, and so we were able to use that quote about him. And so I wanted to shout that out. Uh, my anecdote with Reverend Jackson was on U Street, which I'm gonna give Sam another quick shout out because our initial plan was to have a story about U Street in this week's edition, and he had to make a very quick pivot. But it's online now. Make sure you check it out, and it'll be in this upcoming edition on the history of U Street and some of the history that remains and what people are still trying to preserve. But I met him in front of the historic Lincoln Theater, and it wasn't a long conversation, but one of the things that I was really inspired by was that he started in the Black press. In fact, that was one of the things that made him realize, oh, I got to do something as a paper boy. And so, I think that was just, for me, a wake up call of why we have to make sure we're getting into classrooms, engaging with the young people. Sam and I have talked about our stories as young people in DC with the Washington Informer. And I just have to say, those tuning in, make sure you're giving your young people in your lives the copy of this week's paper. It's so much history. It's so much great information, awesome photos that they'll be able to cherish, but also remember something about where they're from and why it's important. Jesse Jackson was a national icon, but he was a treasure to the district. And so that's my little 2 cents as we wrap.
Yeah, I think we are going to be listening out for more stories. People can do what they want when they want to downplay or disrespect or whatever our heroes, but we define who our heroes are. We in the Black press. And while other media felt that Reverend Jackson was a hog for the camera, we knew that wherever he was, there was a story that needed to be followed. And so we appreciated the fact that, every opportunity that we could be that camera or that reporter in the room that was telling the story when he held a press conference about whatever the issue might be. I see Ms. Abbott, my mother, said, for the record, I held a fundraiser for Reverend Jackson's presidential campaign at the Channel Inn restaurant in Southwest, and she proudly says that they raised $1,500
Wow.
for his presidential campaign. And so, I think people, this is Black history, but this isn't history of 100 years ago, although we should be proud of that history. And it's not our history of thousands of years ago, which Tony Browder talked to us about, because our history does go back that far. It's still a current history that we need to know about, be informed, educate ourselves on, and teach our children, so that he talked about 8 generations from now, just like we're trying to remember folks like Marcus Garvey and others, our children's children will know these people who made a difference in the lives of the world.
Yes. They'll know that they are somebody.
She has a Run Jesse Run pin T-shirt, and who also worked in the presidential campaign. I think everybody should feel proud that this, that again, I keep having to go back to what Tony Browder said. We weren't all kings and queens, right? But we were the people on the ground that made it happen. And so no matter what you did, if you had a sign, if you had a fundraiser, if you wore a button or a pen, whatever you did to make this man's twice run for president a success, plus Barack Obama. We may not have liked everything they did, but the point is that they wouldn't have been able to do it without us.
Right.
So, this is a time that we can all celebrate our history. That's why I love Black History Month.
Yes. Yes, indeed. And, you all, as you continue to have anecdotes about Reverend Jackson, and others, please share it with us. Of course, we're Black History 365. So if they're, thank you, at news@washingtoninformer.com, because these are the stories that we can continue to share and to preserve. Again, I want to hear more about that fundraiser at the Channel Inn. I want to see Mama Claudette. I want to see more of your buttons and be able to tap into some of that memorabilia. And again, that's a legacy that we're able to share and continue here at the Washington Informer.
I don't want to take the conversation sideways, but just even the mention of the Channel Inn when you talk about Southwest Washington and the history of that community, it's nothing like it was then. The Channel Inn was the place to be years ago. Now there's, it's what's on top of it. Who knows? I don't know, but there were only 4 restaurants down there at the wharf. In Southwest, and that was the place where a lot of our political leaders and others went to not only socialize but have events. So that brings back great memories, like Sam's story on U Street that's coming up.
Yes, and also Claudette Perry added, I also praise and honor Reverend Hagler, who was a staunch advocate for freedom and justice in the district. And yes. Absolutely, I mean, it was, as I was talking to Sam, we're in a very spiritual time in the world with the start of Ramadan, with the start of Lent, and then you lose these faith leaders, these civil rights icons, these freedom fighters who really leaned on their, again, staunch foundation and spiritual guidance, but in order to make a difference. So it has to mean something there, I'd love somebody spiritual to break that down further, but.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Misha, before we go, and I know that we have a video or that we want to run after we end, but when I think back of, Reverend Ben Hooks and, all the men of power and influence in those days all had that moniker in front of their, men and women had that moniker in front of their name, which was Reverend.
Yeah.
And so, we often wonder kind of where the leadership is coming from today. And, we shall see. We shall see. So with that, I think we're going to close out, right, with something special that's produced by our team, Chevy Lassiter and Jaman. If we can get them on, and we will bid you all farewell until next Friday.
Yes.
I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. I may be in jail, but I am somebody. I may be uneducated, but I am somebody. I am black, beautiful, proud. I must be respected. I must be protected. I am somebody. Right on. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive on tomorrow night and beyond. Young America, hold your head high now. We can win. You must never stop dreaming. Face reality, yes, but don't stop with the way things are. Dream of things as they ought to be. Dream. Face pain, but love, hope, faith, and dreams will help you rise above the pain. Use hope and imagination as weapons of survival and progress, but you keep on dreaming, young America. Dream of peace. Peace is rational and reasonable. War is irrational in this age and unwinnable. Dream of teachers who teach for life and not for living. Dream of doctors who are concerned more about public health than private wealth. Dream of lawyers more concerned about justice and the judgeship. Dream of preachers who are concerned more about prophecy than profiteering. Dream on the high road with sound values. You must never surrender to inequality. Women cannot compromise ERA or comparable worth. Women are making 60 cents on the dollar to what a man makes. Women cannot buy meat cheaper. Women cannot buy bread cheaper. Women cannot buy milk cheaper. Women deserve to get paid for the work that you do. It's right and it's fair.